Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, it's Murder on the Menu with Karen Pierce. Agatha Christie is one of the most read and written about figures in literary history. Everything from her plots and poisons to her life and legacy has been discussed and dissected, but the culinary delights that pepper her crime fiction have largely been overlooked. Until now, that is. Detective fiction devotee and Christie connoisseur Karen Pierce spent nearly a decade researching and writing Recipes for Murder, 66 dishes that celebrate the mysteries of Agatha Christie, a cookbook that also offers decade-by-decade commentary on the historical and social context of the meals and mysteries Christie served up. From appetizers and drinks to main dishes and desserts, it's a delectably devious bounty. Kemper Donovan, host of the All About Agatha podcast, offered this endorsement. A fresh and fascinating angle. Recipes for Murder is the first cookbook I'd call a page-turner. So much more than a cookbook, it's a source of meticulous research, scholarly insight, and infectious enthusiasm. It will be used for many years to come to nourish body and mind. Now, join us as Karen Pierce reveals all the secrets to creating Recipes for Murder. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Central Booking. I am thrilled to be in the virtual company of Karen Pierce today. She is the author of Recipes for Murder. Recipes for Murder. There it is. 66 dishes that celebrate
the book
mysteries of Agatha Christie. Welcome to the show, Karen. I am so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here too and talk about my book.
I know. It's your book. It's got your name on it. And this is cool for me because I've done a lot of these shows, but I don't think that I've ever discussed a cookbook. And I love Agatha Christie, so this is sort of like the perfect confluence of events. And
Indeed.
and it seems like a logical starting point. I have to ask you, not only is Agatha Christie one of the most read authors of all time, but she's also one of the most written about. If you want to find a book about her person, it's there. Her plots, it's there. Her poisons, those books are there. So I have to imagine it's kind of daunting to find a unique entry point, and yet you did that with this book because you have come to discuss Agatha Christie through the food and drink that appear in this book. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about, your entry into this project and how that happened, how you knew it was an idea worth pursuing given what's been written about her and her books in the past.
Well, the truth is I didn't really even think of it that way. I had always wanted to write a book. I gave up on writing a mystery because I'm not that clever with the puzzles. And one day, I also have a collection of celebrity type cookbooks. So one day I was just on the net, bruising and looking, and I thought to myself, well, why the heck isn't there an Agatha Christie cookbook? Do you know that there's 5 cookbooks for the Fast and Furious?
I did not know that.
I didn't even know they ate in the movie. But there are so many cookbooks for all sorts of things and not a single. There is one Christie cookbook. It's in French language and it's really only available in Europe. So I thought, well, maybe that's something I could do. God knows where I got the chutzpah to say I could do it, but I did. More on the stories than the food. More on the food that's in the stories rather than Christie and what Christie liked to eat. So that's I bookmarked every single time they mentioned food. And then I went back and then I went through it slowly, trying to figure out which was the most important food or the simple one I could recreate, one that had a historical context that might have been interesting, and pick them. And then I started figuring out how to make them. And that took a lot. And sometimes where they're not even mentioned a specific food, one of the tricks I found was to go find old menus from airlines, from trains, from hotels, resorts, And that would give me a really good idea of what people were eating and drinking at the time. And then I could extrapolate that back into the novels. So that's how I found the stuff. And yeah, that's what I did.
You said you're not clever, but I mean, that's kind of brilliant, your entry point into this. And it really shows that you have to sort of be your own amateur sleuth sort of detective to pull this off. So I say you are quite clever, probably more than you know. I mean, it's ingenious to
Maybe
like
I can
look through those
solve
menus.
puzzles, not create them. Maybe that's it.
Right. That's it. Oh my gosh, I love that. All right, so I have to ask you, I mentioned that there are 66 recipes in this book. It's everything, from drinks and starters to main courses and sumptuous desserts. And we can't go through all of them, obviously, we'd be here all day. But can you tell me, about a few of your personal favorites that you came to throughout this experience and how you see them as representing, the works that they're taken from?
So I saw your question, and I'm going to answer it a little bit differently. How I
Please.
thought I'm going to answer it is some of the recipes that are really came from the book. So I'm going to start with Dolly Bantry's marmalade. So I do love Dolly Bantry in all of her shops, and this is from The Body in the Library. And as we all know, Dolly loves a little gardening, and she has a greenhouse and she has an orangery, and she just, if it's green, she grows it, she loves it. On the other hand, Arthur likes marmalade. So I envisioned in my head that in her orangery, she has an orange tree of Seville oranges only, and she makes a little jar of marmalade every couple of months for her dear Arthur. So I created it that way. I went looking to find marmalade recipes that I didn't have to can and preserve and water bath and all. I could just make one jar at a time, is how I kind of imagine Dolly doing it.
Sure.
So that is kind of, this is very 1920s, 30s. This is early Christie, and at a time when people would be doing that kind of thing. You would never go buy marmalade. They would make it. So I like that one. Another one I quite liked finding the recipe of was seed cake for Bertram's Hotel. As you know, Bertram's Hotel is a modern hotel completely set in Edwardian age. So all the food being served there is very Victorian, very Edwardian. And I had such a time trying to find a seed cake recipe, which is really still served today. And this is like a Victorian cake. And what fun it was. And it's a delicious cake. Really impressed by that one. So I really felt that that was another one that really showed Edwardian in this sort of fake 1960s, 60s, fake Edwardian thing. Was really fun because it's a Victorian cake that they still eat today. If you went to pretty much any tea in England, you might be served seed cake. And of course, it's one of Miss Marple's favorites. So quite enjoyed learning that, quite enjoyed making it. And my family was wildly impressed with what a nice cake it was. So good one there. And another one I picked for this answer is hilarious. This is The Pale Horse. The Pale Horse, written in the 60s. And Mark Easterbrook is come out from, writing this archaeological tome that he's been working on, plumps himself down at a Chelsea cafe. And the very nice waitress says, "What'll it be? A nice bacon and banana sandwich?" Well, Mark doesn't know what to make of that. I mean, bacon is for breakfast, bananas for dessert. But when in Chelsea, do as Chelsea does. And so he agrees to have a nice grilled bacon and banana sandwich. Well, I think as you're American, you may well know who made that sandwich famous.
Oh,
None
I do.
other than Elvis Presley. And the mind blows at the idea of Agatha Christie, parsley on one side. Dip it in maple syrup, and it's to die for.
I feel like that should be my breakfast today or my lunch.
Every day.
Like, that's amazing. And
But there's lots of other things that I discovered, like Windsor stew that was really famous with the Georgians, and kind of fell out of favor a little bit, and then was totally decimated during the World War II when there was nothing imported, and it turned into kind of a brown soupy thing. But when you make the original with lamb and beef and parsnips and carrots, it's delicious. And this is another one that comes from, this one comes from Taken at the Flood, which is directly after the war. And you see everyone trying to recover and find their way back to society. And so I feel like this soup stew needs to find its way back to society too, and be the delicious meal that it could be.
I probably should have forewarned people that if they hadn't eaten, they were going to be hungry while watching it. Now you know, and you know why you need to read this book. But it's amazing. It's amazing. And I have to ask you too, because there's such a great structure to this book. I mean, when we think of cookbooks, we usually think of them being delineated by, okay, oh, you get your drinks, your appetizers, your main course, your desserts, and it's segmented that way. But you do a chronological order, not only through era and history, but correspondingly Agatha Christie's publication schedule. And so not only do we get some background about, the food and how it interplays with the plots of the books, or just the books and stories in general, but you sort of get, a historical aspect and a social aspect. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about how you think that this structure really enhances the book so that it's more than just your customary cookbook.
And it's funny because my editor is like, now how shall we order this? And I'm like, by decade, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, what I really didn't want to do that other stuff. That's not the point of the book. So the point of the book is really you start in the beginning and you see kitchen maids and cooks and, big dinners and all that stuff. And as you go through all the decades, you get to the end where, people are making their own food or they're going to cafes and things like that. So the important thing for me was for the reader to understand that this food really changed as you go through, and from very complicated food in the beginning to much simpler food in the end. I mean, Tommy and Tuppence start off running off to the Ritz to have peach melba and lobster americain and all their favorite goodies, and in the end there's Tuppence making casseroles out of her kitchen garden. So life really changed, and she wrote for 60 years. Right. So to cover that and to have people understand what's going on in the background, I thought was really helpful for a lot of people who weren't alive then, who weren't living in Britain then. I mean, most people now were born after World War II. So what do they know about, what these people went through in the Great Depression and the flu epidemic, the First World War, how that impacted on Christie, how all of this stuff impacted on society. In fact, Christie herself thought that the automobile was such an overwhelming thing that in the future hardly anybody would have one, but they would all have kitchen maids. And as we all know, the complete opposite is how it all worked out.
I love it. And what I love about this book is a lot of people don't necessarily think that they have an interest in history, but when you see it through the lens of something else that you might have an interest in, it becomes palatable, if you'll pardon the pun. Yep. But it's just great because you see the stories in the context that they were written. And like you said, you go from seeing people served by teams of servants to serving themselves or serving others, and it's really quite fascinating. And I think it sort of gives you another entry point into the books themselves when we go back and reread them. But another thing I truly appreciated about this book is sort of the extra enhancements that you give us throughout. And what I mean by that is each decade, sort of gets an introduction that sets up the time period and the changes and the evolution that you were talking about that. But not only that, each recipe gets its own introduction. So you learn about the food and how it pertains, to the story or where it appears in the
Yeah.
story. And at the end, we get menus, like thematic menus. If you want to have a Halloween party, like you have a list of menu ingredients, recipes that will work for you. Same for Christmas. And it's funny because I was just telling my wife a few weeks ago, we used to do really fun big Halloween parties and we haven't done one in forever. And I said, what if we used like Agatha Christie as a theme? And then I open your book and there is a menu for a Halloween party inspired by Agatha Christie. So can you tell us a bit about, those extra elements that you added into this book that again makes it very unique?
Well, at the end, my publisher said to me, I think that we need sample menus. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, like a breakfast or a lunch and stuff. And so then I thought, okay, well, let's do what would the pantries have for breakfast if it wasn't, the big on English breakfast? And what would tea with Miss Marple be? Can we pull out her special things? And I'll tell you, the Tommy and Tuppence one is interesting because there's 5, and Tommy and Tuppence are the only 2 that age through the whole thing. So I took all of theirs, and I made my birthday dinner this year were the Tommy and Tuppence recipes, which was great fun. And the one I didn't slip in there was the blackberry jam. And so between you and I put it on little toast with goat cheese and the blackberry jam to make an hors d'oeuvre for that meal. But we did all the other dishes and it was fabulous. It really all went together, the creamed salmon and the casserole. So I think you can have a ton of fun. I did put in a book club one, which is just filled with all sorts of little sampley tart things that might be great fun to have a book club dinner. But so many people were telling me at the festival, I was just at the Agatha Christie Festival in Torquay, that that's what they're going to do. I can't wait to have my friends over and pick menus from the books, and then they would have then the specific books all lined up and they talk about, yeah. So a lot of people having a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how fun is that? And for somebody like me who can get overwhelmed by choices, like picking recipes for a party can just be like overload. But you've already done that for me. So if I
I've
don't
done
feel
that.
like choosing them myself, be like, I'm having a Halloween party and here is my sample menu, and it is literally that simple.
Exactly.
So I want to ask you too, and you sort of broached this topic at the very beginning, but I think, cookbooks, sort of like children's books, though I would say cookbooks are probably a bit more intricate than that. I think a lot of times, people sort of take for granted the intricacies of what it is to put a cookbook together, and specifically a cookbook like this, where you're looking back, at recipes that were popular eras ago. And so you have to come up with them, sort of in a sense where they're modernized to the point that they can actually be made relatively user friendly, by contemporary standards. So briefly, would you mind just, telling us about that process of sort of running your own test kitchen to make sure that these recipes were something that we could use and enjoy today without it being a complete pain in the butt?
Well, I didn't run one test kitchen, I ran 4. I had 3 girlfriends that helped a lot, all in their own homes. So we would take a recipe, or I would find one through my research and I'd twiddle with it and I'd send it off to one of my friends. And they would make it, tell me what needed to be tweaked or worked, and send it back to me. And then I would do it with their tweaks and rewrite it again. And then I would send it to a third person who now hasn't tried either of the first ones and see if they could reproduce it. So we literally did that with everything. So one of the ones that comes to mind is the cream chicken for after the soup for after the funeral. That's a very old cream of chicken recipe. And you know that because there was no salt in it. So when my friend made it, And her husband tested it. They were both like, what's missing? So they decided it was salt. And sure enough, once you added in just the right amount of salt to taste, it was the most delicious soup I've ever had. So that was a fun one to do. Others we've done like that. And I've got to say, one of my friends and I, we redid castle puddings. I'm going to say 5 times.
Wow.
At least 5 kicks at that can. We tried the same recipe 2 or 3 times and just decided that was never going to work. And I went back to the drawing board to find some other route. What was I missing? What's the ingredient that could turn this into a nice little cake instead of a kind of a hockey puck? So there was a lot of that kind of thing going on. And then my editor says, well, we need, because it's international, we need all these, we need the metric and imperial. And metric isn't just all milliliters and stuff. You have to have grams. Well, one of my helpers lives in Europe. So I would just send her lists and lists and lists. Now measure this, measure this. What's a cup of flour? What's a cup of, oh my. So she spent days measuring things and she'd send back the rest. Oh my goodness. So quite a collective effort trying to get all those pieces together. And another tricky bit is when I used my own recipes, because when I write a recipe, I'm like a pinch of this, just stir till it looks right.
Right. Sounds like my recipes.
So now you've got to go, well, stirring till it looks right. How long is that? How fast am I stirring? And so yeah, that was a bit tricky as well to convert those recipes into things that other people could use. But everyone should rest assured that most recipes have been done like 3 or 4 times. Now, the one recipe that has not been done is a pocket full of rye, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. So blackbird pie. Blackbird pie is in fact something that they ate in the UK many moons ago. Blackbird pie was a thing. Now, blackbirds are little songbirds. Now, it's illegal to kill them now, but I did find a blackbird pie with suet and everything in it from the 1880s. And so that's the pie that's in there. But we did do it with Cornish hens. And that's the modernization of blackbird pie. There's no way, I was going to say we should just go out and shoot a few birds. So Cornish hens are very tiny and they worked for it.
That's amazing. And I think that gives people an idea of what goes into a cookbook, because you get 66 recipes that have all been tried 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times, with the exception of the blackbird pie. I mean, that was a lot of work. Thank goodness. It sounds like a lot of fun too. I mean, friends. It's nice to have friends who you can call on.
It's nice to have friends who like to cook too.
Yeah, right.
And especially a couple of them are better bakers than I.
Sure.
I'm very good at the other stuff and not that great a baker. So having their baking skills really helped.
That is a great collaboration.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about Agatha Christie and food too, because I know that we don't necessarily think of her in those terms, but if you read something like her autobiography, you sort of get a sense that food was important to her and her family. And I think that she mentioned several times, how much she adored chocolates, don't we all? I figure if it's good enough for Agatha Christie, it's good enough for me. But can you tell us a bit about, what you know of food and drink as a personal significance in her life beyond books?
Oh yeah. One of her first connections very much was to the cook of her family, Jane. Jane made rock cakes. I don't know what rock cakes are, but Jane made them. Agatha loved them. And I really feel that theme of the cook making the favorite cake is all through her books. There's often a special cake or a special little something only made by the cook. Mm-hmm. And you do see that coming out a lot all the way through. And I really think that's a part of Christie for sure. Cream. Let's talk about cream. Christie loved cream all the time. If you and I were having a cup of champagne to celebrate, she'd have a cup of cream. on her 80th birthday, she had a cup of cream. I mean, this is what she did. And she did keep good wine at Greenway for Max and her son-in-law, but she herself, cream all the way. It's just hilarious how much it runs through. And you often see Poirot saying, "Oh no, could I have the cream puff?" And yeah,
Right.
he really follows some of her sweet tooth. And in fact, this is how much she loved cream. She's living in Baghdad. They're living in these crazy, simple places where they're working on archaeological digs. She gets the chef to milk the buffalo to get buffalo cream so she can make profiteroles.
Wow.
I know.
Trivia you
Now that's
never knew you
dedication
wanted
to
to know.
cream.
That's amazing.
That's one of my favorite stories. But she loved lobster and she had a real taste for caviar. She just, yeah, she liked a lot of the finer things in life. The early books from her autobiography and other sources, she talks about the tables and the tables of food. Her father loved food and entertaining, and the tables would just groan with food.
Right. I love that. And I think, you look back at her books, and a lot of times we overlook the food and the drink aspect because we're so interested in, who's the detective, who done it,
Exactly.
or are they going to be caught? And so you miss all these subtle little love letters to food and drink, but they're there. And then you go revisit the books after reading a cookbook like yours, and you have a whole new, appreciation for that.
You
Which
really do. And you get to see how well she characterized people by what they ate and drank and what they wanted to eat and drink. So that's, or how they thought about stuff. And that's one of the fun things that I got to explore a lot.
right, right. And so, okay, we've talked a lot about Agatha Christie. We've talked a lot about this book, but I want to talk about you for a few moments because, you are not new to mystery. It is a love of yours. And you sort of have developed this great community. I know that you volunteered at a lot of the mystery festivals where readers and writers gather and sort of celebrate that shared love. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us, a bit about your tribe, about these like-minded people that you've known for years and years, and how does having these people in your life, enhance the experience of being a real mystery buff?
Well, so I first read Christie when I was very young and read them all quite young and reread them all in my 20s and 30s. And I still reread them all the time. But I also developed a taste for a lot more different mystery writers, Ian Rankin, Sue Grafton, a lot of the big names. So when I first discovered that they had these mystery conferences, I was like, so I talked one of my friends into going with me. And she'd read a few mysteries, but oh my goodness, to sit there and listen to people talk about the thing you love the most was just amazing. And I loved it. And I went from, panel discussion to panel discussion, just like overloaded with how wonderful it was. Came home with had to buy another suitcase to bring all the books home. It was that exciting. So then when I discovered there was a Christie festival, well, then I went all by myself that time, and you're just in the middle. These are all my peeps. And lots of them came by themselves as well. And we just, you sit down at any table and the person's a Christie fan. So, oh, what fun it is. And the more I went, I got to meet more of the authors and the authorities. And I was just so envious of, like, you studied Christie, really? And I just kept thinking, how can I get in on this? How can I study Christie? This is just so cool. And listening to them talk, and yeah, just loved it. And being around them is really inspiring. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough. If you are a Christie fan, go to the Agatha Christie Festival. Just go. It's a week of events and just so much fun. And everybody around you loves the same thing. So it's just, it's just amazing feeling to talk to them. They all know what you're talking about. And like I said, we came out of the movie from The Haunting in Venice, and we're all like, well, now, what did you think? Did it remind you of this? Did it remind you of that? You know, like we're all there on the same page. So even if some people loved it and some people hated it, we're still all on the same page. So yeah, really a great thing.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny, but I think a lot of people outside of the community think, oh, I mean, mystery writers and mystery readers are just dark people with sordid personalities. And it's not. It's the most generous, uplifting community you could ever hope for, which I think is a pleasant surprise to many. And speaking of, the authorities that you've gotten to meet throughout all these events and conferences, you actually have a book. Your book has a foreword from Dr. John Curran, who Agatha Christie, aficionados will probably remember from writing a series of books all about her secret notebooks, which he analyzed. So I'm wondering if you wanted to mention anything about John Curran.
He was wonderful. As he says in the foreword, I met him at dinner at Greenway, and he encouraged me to go forth, young woman, and write. So I did. And then I came back to him and I said, okay, so I've written it. Will you do a foreword for me? And he said, well, send it along. So I did, and I could be more grateful. He wrote a beautiful foreword. And at the festival this year, he interviewed me. So I got to present my book at the festival being interviewed by Dr. Curran. So I couldn't be happier.
That is exceptional.
And another one I met there also was Kemper Donovan, who is the podcast host of the All About Agatha podcast. And so I also wrote to Kemper asking if he would do a blurb for my book. And he got back to me. He says, I might be a bit late for the blurb, but will you be on my podcast? And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
And so that was a fabulous experience. Yeah. And so then this year I got to meet Dr. Mark Aldridge and JC Benthall. So, it's just great. I just keep meeting these people that are experts. Oh, and Carla Valentine as well, that have all, done what I did. Talking to Carla was really interesting because she did what I did, only she did it with, death, like the forensics, right? Ooh, dead body here. She'd put a post-it note in, just at the same place I'm going, look, talking about coffee, post-it note. So we almost approached our books in the exact same way, which is pretty funny.
That is amazing. Talk about community, and these are nice people to be rubbing elbows with.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, totally. So I have to ask you, before writing your own book, obviously you were an avid mystery lover and a Christie buff in particular. So I have to ask you, what draws you to the mystery genre specifically? And then what are the key ingredients for you that make up sort of the perfect mystery? I know that's very subjective. We all have our own idea of what is our proverbial cup of tea, hopefully not poison. But what does it for you? And do you have any favorite Christies?
So I think what draws people to mysteries, and from the beginning of time till even now, where there's a bit of resurgence, is that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's always resolved. The bad guy doesn't always go to jail, but there's a comeuppance for being a bad guy. And there's some sort of reward for being a good guy. And I think we all need that. Life is confusing and complicated, and the orderliness of a good mystery is just it's a relief to read. It doesn't leave you hanging wondering about things. It leaves you with a feeling of completion. Okay, this was good, we can go on now. So
Right.
I think it really does appeal to people on that level. So for me, the major components are a really good puzzle that's resolved and interesting characters that I can relate to. So I think that those are just the two key things that I think everybody takes from them. That if you relate to the characters, and in particular, you relate to the detective or the person who is solving the crimes, and relate to the people involved in them. And it's a good puzzle, you're going to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
I really think that that's what people of all sorts and every background, that's what they're drawn to.
I think you're right. And like you said, in real life, we unfortunately don't always get that satisfying closure that we're looking for. And so it's nice to know in a murder mystery, despite the murder and the mystery, that will probably happen. And so this is,
Yeah, if you're having a bad day, you can get in that bathtub and read off a Christie, and all of a sudden the world's at the right. The world is put to right again.
I know, and maybe that tells us a little something about why, there has been that resurgence, during pandemic times in Christie,
Yes.
which
I've
surprised a
been
lot of
told by
people.
several librarians that they just couldn't keep Christie on the shelf through the pandemic. And it's not just older people, it's younger people going digging right into them, and like it's pretty surprising. There was a significant group of younger people there at the conference this year. So, yeah, I'm
Which is
excited about that.
Yeah, it's nice because Agatha Christie is just going to go on and on and on. She has for many years, but that would indicate that that is going to continue to be
Yeah,
the
she's
case.
really accessible.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so I have to ask, and this is like picking favorite children, but do you
Yeah.
have any favorite Agatha Christie's that you can return to from time to time and just know that it's going to be the satisfying reading experience that you're looking for?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all have favorites. I'm going to say this first off, Five Little Pigs is the best. That's her best. Now, for me, when I go looking for something that I want to read and a feeling, I love Death on the Nile. I
Hmm.
just love Death on the Nile. There's so many people, there's so many things going on, and there's undercurrents, and and then the background of it all, and the love story, and what's going to happen next. It's such a surprise ending. Yeah, no, Death on the Nile is one of I go back to that one a lot. By the same token, I love The Man in the Brown Suit. Um, it's probably not one of her best, but who didn't want to be Anne Bedingfield? I mean, she's great. I love Murder at the Vicarage, the first Miss Marple. Again, there's probably too much happening in that for purists, but oh, all the crazy people in that one, and everything's going on, and they literally solved the murder by the fact that she couldn't have hidden a gun in her dress. Like, it's just, it's just wonderful. I love it. You can see Miss Marple staring out, oh, I'm just looking at the birds. Sure, Miss Marple.
Yeah, that's what she's doing.
So, I mean, there's lots of them. I could go on for days how much I like so many of them. But I totally advise everyone, go listen to All About Agatha with Kemper Donovan, and you'll have a new appreciation for all of them. It's terrible fun.
Isn't that interesting? I just listened to a podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but from Joan O'Sara called Agatha Christie and the Dandelion Poisoner. And basically it mashes up Christie's history with a true crime case that was happening in England at that time and how it may have been sort of a subtle influence on some of the books she wrote. And it was just very interesting because, you get Agatha's history as a person and a writer interwoven with this other very prominent at the time true crime. It was just fascinating. There's so much out there, and I keep discovering more, and I kind of love it.
And you see that in John Curran's books too,
Oh,
like in some of her lists. She'll
yes.
list actual things that are going on around here, brides in the bath. You know, what could I do with that? And so she does. There's no question. She does get inspired by real life. I'm not sure she follows it all the way through. She's not a true crime novelist by any stretch, but she certainly does get some fun hints from real crimes.
Sure, sure. I love it. There's just so much out there.
Yeah.
Any of your needs, you will find something to sate them. So just a few more questions for you, but I have to ask you now, and I ask this of pretty much everybody who comes on the show because there are always, people watching, I think, with creative ambitions who maybe haven't followed through on that promise or potential yet and are looking for some words, of advice or guidance. So now, not only are you an avid mystery reader, but you are a writer, you have contributed a book to the community. And I'm wondering, upon reflection, and this can be, in terms of creativity or writing in general terms, or more specifically, just having a project like this cookbook that you've now seen, from idea to actually to fruition and publication. What do you think is the best advice that you were ever given? And then the flip side to that coin, the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself throughout the process of actually completing this lovely book.
So I think the best advice for everybody is write what you know. Once you start writing about what you know and what you love, it's easy. It's easy to get it on the paper and then start editing it and looking and the research is a labor of love. All of it starts off as a labor of love. So always start with something you love. I think that is probably the most important thing. Write about what you know. Don't try and write about what you don't know, because you'll make mistakes and it'll just be so much harder, especially if it's, your first book. So I think the best advice that I heard but didn't use is, make a time to do it every day. No, didn't work for me. This thing took me 10 years. There was like months when I did nothing. When I got into the process that I now had an editor and I had to get going, I did one full day a week.
Right.
That may be just the way my brain works, but doing an hour in the morning would mean like I would do 5 hours in the morning. I'd get carried away and then I couldn't do my other work. So no.
Right.
One full day where that's all I did, and then I would put it away and till the next week, because otherwise that's all I would do. Like I'd just
Sure.
get absorbed in it again because I'm doing something I love.
Right.
So
Right.
I think, you've got to schedule time to do it, but know yourself, know what works for you. If you're someone who can get up at 5 in the morning and write for an hour, power to you. If you're the person that writes after you've put the kids to bed, power to you. But for me, it had to be a day where I was focused just on that all day. And I would do different parts. It wouldn't just be writing straight. It would be a day I'm testing a recipe and I'm researching this and I'm thinking about something else. So that's the only words I can tell people to do. It's in you to do, or it ain't.
Right. No, I think that's great perspective. Thank you. One, if you write about something that you were passionate about, it might sustain you for 10 years because it can take that long. And
Yeah,
trust in the process and find your own process. Like you said, you got to find what works for you. You can't do what works for everybody else, because otherwise, you miss a day of somebody else's process and it's like a crisis and then you just stop. It's like a diet,
exactly.
right?
You
Like I
you
went off the
defeat
diet and I'm
yourself by
done.
not following your own rules or something. And I just thought I can't do that like that. This was a labor of love. It needs to be treated like a labor of love, and I work on it like it's a labor of love.
Right.
And I think that shows through on every page of the book. Like even when the editor sent me the copy of all the illustrations that are in there, he sent me a thing going, well, here's the spreadsheet, what do you think? And I'm like, I spent the whole weekend redoing it, the whole entire weekend. And I sent it back to him going, I hope you don't mind. But if he'd had a picture of a peach, I found a better picture of a peach.
Right.
And like it was my baby,
Right.
I went through it line by line and made sure everything worked for me.
Sure. Well, that's your name on the book.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I had a vision of the way it was going to work. And I love my editor. He did an amazing job supporting me. So yeah, we're good with
That's,
that.
and as we always say, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission,
Yeah, exactly.
After you put in all that work, I mean, of course they're going to go with that better picture of the peach. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. And that's what he said. He came back and go, oh, you're right. That is a better picture of a dog. And
See, good man, good editor.
yeah, it was good.
All right, so I have to ask you, after the 10 years of work that went into this book, I'm wondering, do you have the bug? Do you anticipate that you might write another book? And if so, any ideas what that could potentially be? Can you leave us with a tease?
I think now I've understood how it needs to be structured. Um, I think I'm going to write a companion book. Whether I think I might focus on the short stories, the plays, maybe even some of the books that I hadn't covered as much.
Right.
I don't know. Kind of working is there's something gelling in my head where it's like the recipes of Poirot, the recipes of Marple. Maybe I might look at it rather than in the decades, which we've done now, to kind of look at the people and the characters of the Poirot mysteries and what, what's the difference between those kind of foods that he was eating and what was being offered at the vicarage, for instance, and stuff like that. So kind of something like that, maybe.
I love it. So we have more to look forward to, which is great. You can tell us, how to measure those eggs is Poirot
Yes,
says. What is the right way
exactly.
to measure your egg? Oh my gosh, I love it. So, Karen Pierce, thank you so much for being here. The book right here is Recipes for Murder. It is so much fun. I mean, in listening to Karen speak, you obviously get an idea of how much fun you're going to have with this book. I think before we started recording, we dubbed this like Christie food porn, which is a whole new thing. So you were like you are the face of Christie food porn.
I'm the face of Christie food porn. Yay!
It's all you've ever aspired to, and
Oh, I hope all your readers just enjoy it and, just, yeah. I mean, you don't even have to cook a single dish out of it to enjoy this cookbook,
that is so true. That's how I'm reading it. I have made nothing yet, but it is such an enjoyable read, and you have so much fun with the book that it actually makes you want to, do these recipes and have a whole experience with people that you love. Because what's better than good food and good company
Exactly. And
and a
that's
good
it.
book,
That's,
obviously.
yeah. Well, good books.
Yes. Karen, thank you so much. It was such a delight to meet you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was great. I enjoy talking to people who want to talk about this book because, yeah, spread the love, spread the joy. It's just a
Yeah,
hoot.
I am here for it.
Well, thank you, John.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.